I'm Nima Rajan. The Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec, hosted 5 federal party leaders yesterday for the official French language leaders debate. Much of the back and forth revolved around healthcare and how to pay for it. The moderator pushed the politicians to state whether they would deliver the extra $28 billion in annual funding that the provinces want. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau pledged to add $25 billion, but not unconditionally. This while the Conservatives' Erin O'Toole said he would boost health transfers by $60 billion over 10 years. And this would be done without conditions out of respect for provincial jurisdiction. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said he was open to the idea, and Green Party leader Annamie Paul underscored the need for fundamental reform of Canadian healthcare. The official English language debate begins at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday. Well, the Conservative Party released the costing for its election platform before the debate last night. The document was released amid mounting criticism from Liberal leader Justin Trudeau. This is over Erin O'Toole's failure to produce the balance sheet for his plan. Tory platform pledges would add $30 billion to this fiscal year's forecasted budget deficit of $138 billion. Tensions in the northeast BC city of Dawson Creek over COVID-19 vaccines and vaccine passports has prompted the local Chamber of Commerce to cancel a federal election all-candidates meeting. Chamber Executive Director Kathleen Connolly says the meeting set for earlier this week was dropped. This after officials decided the safety of candidates and members of the public was at risk. She says there has been an escalation of violent behaviors in recent weeks, including threats to officials. Treating COVID-19 is proving to be costly for the hospital system. Data from the Canadian Institute for Health Information shows the average cost for patients being treated for COVID in hospital is $23,000. This is 4 times higher than a patient with influenza. The cost for a COVID patient treated in the intensive care unit can climb to an estimated $50,000. That compares to an average of $8,000 for a pneumonia patient who doesn't spend as long in hospital on average. The BC Urban Mayors Caucus has released its asks for the next federal government. The caucus has released its 2021 blueprint for BC's urban future recommendations for housing, including a $2 billion annual investment to end chronic homelessness, help for the nonprofit sector to purchase and preserve buildings, and funding to support urban Indigenous organizations. The BC Urban Mayors Caucus is an informal, nonpartisan group of mayors from 13 cities representing more than half of the province's total population. The Congress of Aboriginal Peoples is alleging discrimination against off-reserve and non-status Indigenous people by the Canadian government. The CAP's filing with the United Nations Human Rights Committee says Justin Trudeau's Liberal government has adopted a distinctions-based approach to developing Indigenous policy. The complaint says the government has chosen to engage with only 3 recognized groups: the Assembly of First Nations, the Métis National Council, and the Inuit Tapparit Kanatami. None of these groups represent off-reserve or non-status Indigenous people. More than 70% of Canada's Indigenous people live off-reserve. Suncor Energy says it is looking to increase its ownership stake in the White Rose offshore oil field to 40% from 27.5%. Suncor says the deal depends on Cenovus Energy deciding to move ahead with the expansion of West White Rose. Cenovus operates the expansion off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. Calgary-based WestJet says all of its employees will be required to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. The airline says staff must meet the requirement by October 30th, and the airline will not provide testing as an alternative to vaccination. WestJet says it will evaluate and accommodate employees who are unable to be vaccinated against COVID-19, either through medical or other exemptions. The Royal Canadian Navy is hosting its biannual live fire training event off the coasts of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. The exercise, known as Cutlass Fury, is meant to improve the readiness of Canada's Atlantic Fleet. Navies from the US and France will also be participating in the event, as well as the Royal Canadian Air Force. The training started on Tuesday and will continue until September 17th. The Western Hockey League is juggling its early season schedule to deal with ongoing border restrictions. The league said teams in the BC division will only compete exclusively against other BC-based teams during October. Teams in the US division will only compete against other American teams. The WHL's regular season is set to begin on October 1st. All right, stay with us as we unpack the federal elections French debate with a special focus on the foreign policy portion of the debate. We'll speak with former International Trade Minister Stockwell Day up next. This interview and more news from around the world coming up next on Forum Daily. So stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back after some short messages. The federal election campaign moved to the Canadian Museum of History for the official French language leaders' debates yesterday. The debate featured a variety of topics, and these included climate concerns, healthcare and the pandemic, childcare funding, Indigenous people and culture, gun control, and foreign policy. In addition to questions from moderators, the debate featured questions from voters. One of the questions from the public included a question on the evacuation in Afghanistan from Catherine Rusk, whose sister, Captain Nicola Goddard, was killed by the Taliban in 2006. This began the foreign policy part of the debate. More on this with former International Trade Minister, the Honourable Stockwell Day. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Hi, good to be with you.
So, sir, let's start with the situation in Afghanistan. What did the party leaders have to say on this issue during the debate?
Well, on this, and in terms of how it's going to affect the vote in Quebec, and that's really what the debate was last night, certainly we need to keep in mind that a significant portion of Canada's armed forces are, in fact, men and women from Quebec. So there is some strong emotional tie there. They won't like the fact, and there were issues regarding people being left in Afghanistan. Was everything done by the federal government, in fact, that could be done? And were things handled in an organized and appropriate way? So those will resonate somewhat. We also have to keep in mind that in an election, especially one focusing on Quebec, issues of foreign affairs, issues of international relations, yes, they're important, but they're not the overall driver. And in regards to your good question here, what really is resonating in Quebec is interesting, and maybe the viewers from coast to coast aren't completely aware, that the issue of immigration, in terms of Quebecers look at who can come into the province and how much say do we have, that's going to be very key. And this morning, it was interesting to note, and I think yours is the only network that's on this, Monsieur Legault, the Premier of Quebec, the Coalition Avenir, he said very clearly, they're not in love with any of the federal parties, but he said he appreciates the sensitivity on the conservative side in terms of allowing Quebec greater sway in its immigration choices. So that's how the foreign affairs, if we can use that word, issues are really going to play out in Quebec. They're very protective of their culture, the language, of course, and the party that seems to be, yes, Afghanistan is a factor and who can handle these type of things. But the party that seems to be most sensitive to their concerns on immigration is going to get a solid look from Quebecers in the vote.
All right, sir, we've got about 2.5 minutes left, but I want to turn to another issue discussed in the debate, China. So what are the various party proposals for dealing with a more aggressive China, especially considering the detainment of the two Michaels and the human rights abuses in the country?
Right, again, key issue. And each party has a perspective. Of course, I don't want to just single out the conservatives here, but what they've done, again, their timing on this is interesting to be in time for the debate tonight, is that they're going to take, it appears that they're going to be taking a stronger stand, and they've articulated this in terms of goods being imported from China. A lot of people aren't aware, possibly, that from the autonomous region, so-called East Turkestan, where the Uyghurs are under significant persecution and imprisonment, about 25% of the world's cotton, believe it or not, comes from that region. And about 20% of certain vegetables like tomatoes come from that region. It's an astounding amount. And there's pretty strong suggestion that this is, if not outright slave labor, it's forced labor. And so the conservatives are singling out, they're trying to be specific to catch the eye of Quebecers and others in terms of here's some specific products that they're going to actually deal with to deal with things like slavery and forced labor coming out of China. And again, Premier Legault, again, very important this morning, he has come out saying that what would be best for Quebecers are the fact that the Conservatives are saying they're going to allow sway on foreign policy, but also on healthcare and on Bill C-21, which is a bit of a foreign issue to the rest of Canada in terms of religious garments. And it put Mr. Singh in a bit of a tough position because, in fact, and I say unfortunately, he wouldn't actually be able to teach or be a police officer or a firefighter right now in Quebec. And the Conservatives have said they're the only ones who are not going to contest Bill C-21. They're going to let the Quebec government duke that out, and they're going to stand back from that. So all of these issues, combined with sensitivities on China and Afghanistan, as you have mentioned.
All right, sir, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We are just about 3 seconds out, but we'll be right back, everyone. The BC government says the pandemic-related rent freeze imposed earlier last year will end on December 31st. A release from the Ministry of the Attorney General says the maximum allowable rent increase for 2022 is set at 1.5% based on inflation. No increase is allowed before the end of December, and landlords must provide a minimum of 3 months' notice. Aided by cooler temperatures and rain, the number of wildfires burning in BC has come down to about 210. The BC Wildfire Service says 8 of these are considered wildfires of note, which means that they are highly visible or pose a potential threat to public safety. The province has 5 evacuation orders and 24 evacuation alerts in effect. About 8,700 square kilometers of land has been scorched this year because of wildfires. A group of Alberta doctors says the province's healthcare system is on the verge of collapse. They say this is due to COVID-19. The group adds that the system will crumble if the government doesn't strengthen public health measures. Intensive care units are operating at 87% capacity, even after the province added more beds. Physicians with the advocacy group Protect Our Province says staffing challenges and limited restrictions to curb the spread of COVID-19 have created a dire situation. The Saskatchewan Health Authority is going to keep overseeing operations at Extendicare long-term care homes in the province for another 30 days. Last month, Saskatchewan's ombudsman found that Parkside Extendicare in Regina was woefully unprepared for a deadly COVID-19 outbreak last year that killed 39 people at the facility. The Health Authority responded by announcing that it would take over the administration of the home and 4 other Extendicare facilities for 30 days. Students in some of Ontario's largest school boards head back to class today amid a 4th wave of COVID-19. Today marks the first day of school for students in the Toronto, Peel, York, and Durham boards. Some boards started their school years earlier this week. It will be the 3rd school year affected by the pandemic. Ontario's Superior Court of Justice has ruled the Provincial Minister of Municipal Affairs acted unreasonably and unlawfully. This is because he only consulted with the public months after it enacted the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act. The court says the provincial government broke the law by failing to adhere to the Environmental Bill of Rights. In a statement, a spokeswoman for Municipal Affairs Minister Steve Clark said the government was forced to act quickly in the face of a rapidly changing pandemic. The Quebec coroner's inquest has heard disturbing details from health officials who arrived at a Montreal area long-term care home during a COVID-19 outbreak last year. They found residents who were desperate for water and had been left in beds soaked with urine and feces. Martine Degnaud, a coordinator for the local health authority, testified that she went to Residence Heron the evening of March 29, 2020. This was after being informed it was struggling with staff shortages. The coroner's mandate is to investigate deaths at 6 Quebec long-term care homes and 1 seniors residence. The 4 Atlantic premiers are scheduled to meet in Moncton, New Brunswick later this month. The COVID-19 pandemic is expected to dominate much of their discussion. It will be the first in-person meeting of the Council of Atlantic Premiers for newly elected Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston and Newfoundland and Labrador's Andrew Furey, who was elected last August. The meeting is set for September 27th and 28th. Nova Scotia is moving to the fifth phase of its post-pandemic reopening plan on September 15th. The Provincial Department of Health says masks will no longer be mandatory beginning at 12:01 a.m. on September 15th. But wearing them is still strongly encouraged. Other public health measures like gathering limits and physical distancing will also be lifted. Officials say proof of full vaccination will be required beginning October 4th for Nova Scotians aged 12 or older for various non-essential activities. The Toronto International Film Festival is uniquely reliant on crowds, which has made its 2021 edition particularly challenging during the pandemic. Beginning Thursday, TIFF will be a hybrid event, but streets will not be closed off as usual in downtown Toronto. Some venues won't be open, theater seating will be socially distanced, and the festival has brought back the virtual platform. TIFF has been downsized to about 100 films, which is roughly half of a typical year. An elder from the Champagne and Aziak First Nation is the 2021 recipient of the Yukon's Council of the Federation Literacy Award. Vera Brown received the award, marking her exceptional achievement, innovative practice, and excellence in adult literacy at a ceremony in Whitehorse. A residential school survivor, Miss Brown continued learning her own language after leaving school at the age of 16. She has been an Indigenous language teacher in Yukon for decades. All right, stay with us. We will take a look at stories happening around the world up next. ECOWAS sends a delegation to Guinea after a coup. The Taliban bans protests, and North Korea holds a military parade. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world coming up after the break on Forum Daily. So stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the al-Qaeda extremist group may attempt to regenerate in Afghanistan following the NATO withdrawal. That's the nature of the organization, he told a small group of reporters on Thursday in Kuwait City. This was at the conclusion of a 4-day tour of Persian Gulf states. He said the United States is prepared to prevent any al-Qaeda comeback that would threaten the United States. A delegation of West African leaders is to go to Guinea Thursday to meet with the junta that toppled President Alpha Condé in a coup earlier this week. Top officials of West Africa's influential economic bloc, ECOWAS, are expected to meet in Conakry, Guinea's capital. The meeting will be with the military officers now ruling the country and to press them to immediately return the country to constitutional rule. The 15-nation regional bloc has suspended Guinea following the coup led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya. The Interior Ministry of the new Taliban government is seeking to end protests in Afghanistan. The minister has issued an order to end all protests in the country unless demonstrators get prior permission, including approval of slogans and banners. It is unlikely that the women who have been leading the near-daily protests demanding their rights from the country's hardline Islamic rulers will be allowed to protest under the new rules. Civil defense forces carrying rifles and personnel wearing gas masks and red hazmat suits paraded North Korea's capital overnight. This was in a celebration of the nation's 73rd anniversary. The parade, overseen by a much slimmer Kim Jong-un, centered around public security forces instead of the major military units that handle Mr. Kim's nuclear and missile arsenal. The event appeared to be aimed at a domestic audience instead of displaying military might threatening the U.S. Experts say the toned-down event reflected the challenges facing North Korea. El Salvadorians trying to pay for a cup of coffee or receive money sent from relatives in the U.S. using Bitcoin continue to struggle to perform transactions. Problems still plague the digital wallet Chivo yesterday. El Salvador's president kept citizens apprised of advances of gradually expanding the ability to download the application throughout the day. He said the idea is to go bit by bit so as to not saturate the servers with so many enrollments at the same time. The Australian government has confirmed it has refused to allow climate change goals to be written into a proposed free trade deal with Britain. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said on Thursday the trade deal under negotiation with Britain was not the document to include UN goals to limit global warming. Citing an email from an unnamed British official last month, Sky News reported British ministers had agreed to bow to pressure from Australia. The pressure was to drop binding commitments to the Paris Climate Change Agreement from the bilateral trade deal. Japan is extending a state of emergency in Tokyo and 20 other areas until the end of September. The current emergency, which was to end on Sunday, was issued in Okinawa in May and expanded to cover Tokyo and Summer Olympics venues. The largely request-based measures have become less effective as the exhausted public ignores them. The Philippines governing party has nominated President Rodrigo Duterte as its vice presidential candidate in next year's elections. His candidacy is seen as an attempt to stay near the center of power while avoiding constitutional term limits. Mr. Duterte has maintained his popularity among Filipinos. He said he hoped his nomination will allow him to continue serving the Filipino people and help lead the entire nation toward greater progress. Several Malaysian mothers have won a legal battle for the right to pass their nationality to their children born abroad. Malaysia's constitution gives fathers the automatic right to confer citizenship to their children born abroad, but it doesn't mention mothers. 6 Malaysian women and the family support group Family Frontiers filed a legal suit in December 2020. Family Frontiers said the Kuala Lumpur High Court ruled on Thursday that Malaysian women have the same automatic rights as Malaysian men to pass their citizenship to their overseas-born children. Taiwan's president has overseen the commissioning of a new domestically made Navy warship. This is part of the island's plan to boost indigenous defense capacity amid heightened tensions with China. President Tsai Ing-wen spoke Thursday at a naval base on the island's east coast. She said the ship proves that on the path to becoming independent in national defense, no matter what difficulties arise, we can overcome them one by one. Ms. Tsai has made boosting Taiwan's domestic defense industry a priority. Researchers have completed a comprehensive online map of the world's coral reefs by using more than 2 million satellite images. The Allen Coral Atlas was named after the late Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen and will act as a reference for reef conservation, marine planning, and coral science. It is the first global high-resolution map of its kind. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily.